All right, guys, welcome back to the Low Carb Consultant Podcast. So today I'm excited to introduce Dr. Scott Sherr. He is a board certified internal medicine physician who focuses on health optimization, medicine, and integrative hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So he serves as the COO of both Smarter Not Harder and Troscriptions, the company behind the innovative troche supplements that boost metabolism, brain function, and resilience. His work brings together telehealth, personalized protocols, and cutting edge longevity tools to help people heal and perform at their best. So, Dr. Scott, pleasure to have you on, man, and finally meet you.
Likewise, Max. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was saying before we recorded, I know there's lots of talk online about methylene blue and
Mhm.
all of these different supplements in regards to human optimization, performance optimization. Definitely want to touch on a lot of that stuff,
Sure.
as well as some of the. I was doing some research on some of the other supplements and protocols that Troscriptions
Mhm.
offer. So definitely want to dive into all that. Maybe before we get into all of that, could you give the listeners who just might not be familiar with who you are quite yet, just a real brief background on yourself and what took you down this specific optimization pathway?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to go with the short story today. So, I grew up the son of a chiropractor. So I grew up pretty alternatively outside the box. And that was my framework until I went to college and then medical school I decided to go to, thinking that I could find a really cool way to kind of bridge the gap between what was really just called alternative medicine at the time. There was no integrative medicine. There was no functional medicine. None of that stuff really existed when I was going to school, although it was nascent. It was early days. And then I thought, well, I'll go to medical school. I'll figure it out. I'll figure out how to be this really cool doctor that does everything, that can do conventional medicine, that can do alternative medicine, and then find a way to kind of marry it all together. And so I ended up taking my fastest road outside or out of medical school and residency, doing my internal medicine residency, which is the 3-year program after 4 years of medical school. And then from there, I kind of gravitated towards looking at various tools and technologies that were marrying both the alternative and the allopathic worlds. And this particular technology that I focused and specialized in for over a decade and more now is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. And so over that decade, I created what I called an integrative approach to hyperbaric therapy that created kind of a 7 or 8 sort of pillar program for people as they were thinking about using hyperbaric therapy and how to kind of contextualize it in their own personalized way, in the sense of like, is it right? Is it something they should do now? Something they should do later? Should they optimize things ahead of time? And then throughout that time, I was always sending people over to integrative functional kinds of doctors to help do some foundational kinds of testing. And then eventually I met a colleague in 2017 named Dr. Ted Atracoso, who had started this thing called Health Optimization Medicine in Practice. And it's a nonprofit organization. At that point, it was just early on his practice that he was actually developing into a nonprofit. And then in
Mhm.
2017, we operationalized it and made it a nonprofit organization that is a framework that trains practitioners like me on how to optimize the health of our patients and clients using a foundational framework, using things called like metabolomics and epigenetics, gut immune system, and more in a very holistic framework. And so I use that as the foundation of what I do now in clinical practice. I have my own concierge clinical practice just using that framework. And then I consult with people for hyperbaric medicine all over the world, sometimes just in hyperbaric medicine using an integrative framework without that foundation of health optimization medicine. But oftentimes that's where I try to kind of lean people into, depending on the situation. And so I've been doing that as sort of a concierge health optimization medicine practitioner since 2019, I would say. And then in 2020, we launched a company called Troscriptions out of the nonprofit. This company called Troscriptions was developed to help people right now while they're on the longer path of optimizing their health. And many people know that it doesn't take a day or a week or a month, oftentimes, to really rebuild and rejuvenate our health after 40 or 50 years of not feeling very good or getting to the point that you need help now. And so Troscriptions was developed to help people right now while they're on the longer path of optimizing their health and giving them help with energy, with focus, with sleep, with stress, with immune system function, and more. And this all kind of all gravitates around my clinical practice, from the clinical practices that the people that our Troscriptions company, there's a number of us that are practitioners in that company that still run our own clinical practices. Our nonprofit is the same thing. And so it all kind of goes around how we see patients and really trying to help people as the most holistic way as possible.
Yeah, and so it definitely sounds like there's a multitude of different companies at play here. I just had a quick question in regards to hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Yeah.
How specifically would you consult with like a client on utilizing a protocol like that? It sounds like that's something that they have to go into like a center or a clinic to have done, or that's not something unless they have like the actual chamber at their house, right? Like they wouldn't be able to do that at their house.
So you can have hyperbaric chambers in clinics for sure. And there's different
Yeah,
types of hyperbaric chambers in clinics. You can also have different hyperbaric chambers at your house. People have hyperbaric chambers at their house all the time. And I used to work as a medical director of a number of facilities in the Bay Area in California where I lived. And I would see people that would come in and want to use the medical grade chambers. And then over the years, I met a guy, kind of like a Dr. House kind of guy, actually. And he
sure.
would have phone calls with people all over the world, giving them sort of second opinions about their health and then giving them additional advice. I'm like, why can't I do that for hyperbaric therapy? And so I basically became and still do have an online telemedicine hyperbaric consulting practice where I talk to people all over the world about how to optimize their hyperbaric experience, their protocols, the tools, technologies, and other things that they can use in addition. What lab tests might be helpful. The health optimization medicine framework is my preference, but that's not always possible for people depending on where they are and what they're doing. Whether, what other surveillance kinds of things might be helpful as they're going through hyperbaric therapy, whether practitioners, whether referrals might be helpful. Should they go see like a neurologic chiropractor? Should they go see an acupuncturist or whatever, depending on what the situation is? And so I've done that. Yeah, I've been doing that a long time now, since probably 2000, I don't know, 17 or 18 or something like that, where I've been
Interesting.
doing, so before telemedicine became cool kind of thing. And but it was small for a while, but it's grown, significantly over the years because I've been involved in hyperbaric medicine for as long as I have. But what I've always thought of hyperbaric medicine, honestly, Max, as kind of like a smokescreen for what I actually do, which is I try to really optimize patients' health. And that is not something that happens overnight, as mentioned. And so, when I'm talking to people about hyperbaric therapy, I'm very clear if I think that's not the right time for them to go into a chamber. And it might be something where it's better to optimize, various biomarkers, especially your capacity to make energy and detox from the energy that we make before you go into a chamber and flood yourself with a whole bunch of oxygen and cause a whole bunch of oxidative stress or stress in the system. And
Mm.
so oftentimes it's better to wait 3 or 6 months if you don't have an acute reason to go in the chamber, to make sure you're pretty well optimized before you do a protocol, unless you're already kind of very healthy and it's not a big issue. But for the most part, for most people, they do benefit from having that kind of window. And the key really there is to understand that going in hyperbaric chamber, you're increasing the amount of oxygen in circulation. And so when you do that, you're kind of revving up your body's capacity to try to make energy. But it also revs up your body's capacity to create something called reactive oxygen species, or ROS, or oxidative stress free radicals, all kind of names for the same thing. And so if your body doesn't have the capacity to make energy well because the mitochondria aren't working very well, or your body doesn't have the capacity to detox from the energy that it makes, because when you make energy, it's not like it's free. You make carbon dioxide and water, but you also make these reactive oxygen species, and you need antioxidants to neutralize those. And so if you don't have enough antioxidants around, you're going to feel crappy. Sometimes it's just crappy for a couple of days. That's normal sometimes, but it shouldn't be for like 2 weeks of doing hyperbaric therapy and still feeling terrible, right? And so
Hmm.
my framework here is like, let's focus on the cellular side of things. Let's focus on the cellular medicine aspect, focus on mitochondrial function, optimize that. And then by doing that, using this health optimization medicine framework, then that's, maybe 3 or 6 months later, then that's when I'm going to put them in a hyperbaric chamber. They're going to see the best results. But the key really is to focus on the mitochondria oftentimes, and
Yep.
then kind of build out from there. And that's what I use with the products at Troscriptions. That's what I use it with my health optimization medicine practice. And then, send people every which way across the world to do different things to help their mitochondria work better, depending on the situation.
Yeah, very cool. And let's dive a little bit deeper into that because I kind of want to get into how you prescribe certain protocols based off the client and what they're specifically looking to achieve. I would imagine, maybe I'm off base here, I would imagine that most of your clients consulting with you are probably high level athletes. Would that be accurate?
No, actually,
Really?
I have a whole gamut of people that I see. I see high level athletes. I see. It's interesting. Like when I first started my health optimization practice, so it kind of maybe the evolution is this, right? So on the hyperbaric side, the majority of people that I still see are coming in with conditions. They're coming in with strokes, with traumatic brain injuries, with surgical issues. But over the years, the number of people that have come in for endurance, for athletics, for performance has gone up significantly. So it used to be
Interesting.
like 95.5. yeah, 95% condition based and 5% performance based. But now over the years, it's probably more like 50-50, maybe like
No
60-40,
way.
where 60% condition, 40% performance. So it's
Very
definitely
cool.
changed a lot over time. And then in the respect of, when I see sort of in my health optimization practice, it's actually about the same. It's about 50-50, where I see about 50% people that are really more on the performance side, and I see 50% of people that really on more the health optimization, like, they have chronic issues, or they may not, but they're sort of on the place where um, they're kind of older and they may have other things going on. So
Hmm.
for a while I was working with biohackers, and that was no fun. I do like biohackers in general, but like the problem is that they wanted to do too many things all at the same time, and like it makes it very difficult to know what's working, what's not working, if you're throwing 20 different supplements at something just because you feel like something looked cool on Instagram. And
Yeah.
so the big problem out there, Max, is that like there's so many people, talking heads out there, that saying you need to take this for your sleep stack. You need to take this. There's even somebody coming out with a book called Protocols pretty soon, and that I'm pretty angry about, because I'm going to have to deal with all that shit that comes from people saying I followed the protocol in this book. It didn't work for me. Shocking. It wasn't you. It was the person who wrote the protocol that has never seen it, like has never seen a patient in their life. I'm not trying to name names, but you probably know who I'm talking about. And
Well,
so,
okay, I can name a name. The first name that comes to mind are like the Brian Johnsons of the world who are trying to live forever. Like
well, I
that's
mean, well, the Brian's interesting, right? Because I think what Brian is just kind of like a shock factor for people, right? And I,
sure.
I think that's not a bad thing in some ways, but if you try to follow his protocol, I promise it won't go well for you. Promise.
Yeah,
Believe me,
it's ridiculous. It's
and I've
crazy.
seen a number of people try, and it doesn't go well. And what I often like to say in corresponding is like, look, you can do 90% of what he does and not spend the ridiculous amount of money, and you can still eat meat. God damn it, please still eat meat, because if you don't, it's not good for most people. Unless you're like an anomaly, I don't work with vegans in general as a practitioner, because it's very difficult to optimize their vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors. It's just not possible, unless they're like having gigantic amounts of supplements. We're just not like evolutionary programmed to do it. And so Brian, for example, has like 500 supplements a day to try
Yeah.
to compensate for not eating like a piece of meat, right? Because he's worried about something in it. Um,
You would think, real quick, you would think with all, like, with how smart that guy is and how much money he spends and the amount of money he spends on the team to have around him, you would think that, like, he would actually incorporate some meat into his diet. Knowing what we know about, like you said, the evolution behind how we're actually supposed to eat, you would think that he would involve some meat in his diet. I'm actually pretty surprised that he doesn't.
we'll see. I mean, he's always changing things, right? Like just
Sure.
like, and see, my sense of it is that he thinks he can outsmart nature, which is bullshit. You can't, right? And like,
Yeah.
and that's just the nature of the human form, right? We also like, and what we used to like what was the headline back in the 1960s and 70s? It was basically that something, we were going to live through chemistry, like we're eating through chemistry, everything, because it was during the space race and everything was like NASA based, and you had plastic meals and you had microwaves, and like we're living in this like, chemistry induced utopia, which we know is now bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I used to watch the Jetsons as a kid. I wanted my own little space car and things, and it seemed cool, but it's not cool, right? Because if you go to Mars on a rocket ship, like you're not going to do very well as a human, right? We know humans cannot do these things very well. You probably
Yeah.
need more meat, to be honest, but I mean more than, and probably better sunlight and better radiation protection and all those kinds of things. But that being aside, I think that what you find with a lot of people now is that they go online and they find that there's a cool supplement, there's a cool technology, and like, and they have no like framework to how to use all that stuff. And
Yeah.
so the way that I like to kind of, you know, take a 30,000 foot view, that meta view is like, well, let's have a framework where all that kind of sits in, rather than just
Mhm.
like going to look at the new squirrel that climbed up the tree, your favorite influencer. And not to say people don't have good things to say. I have friends that are really great educators on there as well. So, and I think that's important. But, for me, it's always about this sort of ecosystem that you can create for your patients. And then everything else gets a lot easier to manage. And so that's what health optimization medicine is. It's a framework. And then it really looks at that cellular side of things, like from like the micro scale, and not, but not just looking at numbers, but that's a big part of it. But then taking it from there and saying, okay, are you getting sun? Are you, what's your toxic exposure? Like, what's your stress like? What are your relationships like? And then looking at all that in this sort of totality, right? And one of the totalities I've been talking about a lot lately that I think resonates with me, and then also a lot of my patients, is something that I call like this. It's called the sympathetic spiral of doom, which is something that I need some music afterwards. Go dun dun dun. Like it sounds dangerous, and it is, right? Like basically, we're stuck in this sort of our nervous system is stuck in fight or flight, stuck in activation mode, doesn't know how to shut off. And then as a result of that, we deplete neurotransmitters, we deplete hormones, we screw up our mitochondria that are trying to make more energy, but they can't after time. And so you get this sort of perpetual cycle and spiral where then the mitochondria aren't making much energy. And then as a result of that, you're trying to spit out more stress hormones to compensate. And then you can just, you crash at some point. Like
Yeah.
it happens to almost everybody that's in sympathetic overload. So, so I don't remember your question, but that's the answer to it.
No worries at all, because where I wanted to go next is maybe diving into specific protocols based off of who you're working with and what they're ultimately looking for. How do you decide the first thing to target for a client wanting faster recovery, metabolic gains, whatever the case is? How do you go about that?
Well, it depends on the person and kind of where they're
Sure.
starting from and where they want to go. And are we going to be able to do like lab work? Are we going to be able to have time to be able to kind of create a plan for somebody? Or is it somebody that needs something tomorrow? Obviously, the better situation is somebody that has time to plan what's going on. And then you can create a plan that can help them long term, and then short term help support that plan as they go. That's the more ideal situation, right? But like the key really is that for everybody, like the basics for a reason. Like they're important for everybody, right? We have to have the basics at play. The basics are not basic. They're not easy, but they're basic is what it comes down to.
Hmm.
Because, eating well, moving well, drinking enough fluids, hydrating, getting enough sun and getting enough sleep. Like these are like the basic things that all of us need. But very difficult for some of us to really fully encompass all the time, right? And so when I'm working with somebody, I really have to understand what their goals are. But at the same time, my perspective on with the health optimization framework is like, well, I need to know those goals, but to get those goals really to be accomplished, we got to get a foundation for you to start off with. So I use something called metabolomic testing, which is the
Okay.
study of how our cells are working in real time. And it takes environmental inputs, it takes inputs from your cells, and you look at all these things real time that's happening right now. And then from there, you're able to kind of build a profile of what somebody requires from a vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors perspective. If they have heavy metal toxicity, if they need different fatty acid profiles, you can work on all that. That takes time. And then I look at somebody's
Sure.
gut as well, looking at the gut microbiota, also looking at signs of things like gut inflammation, leaky gut, digestive issues, because those are really important. And then with all that data, I create a health optimization plan for patients. That's kind of a basic foundational one. And then to get them from point A to point, Z or whatever there's really no final point, but as we keep going, it's like it's like pie, right? It starts off and there's never an ending for pie. It's just like life until, I guess you die. But the goal really is the path, as I like to say. But in the beginning, many people do need more support. And so some things that I'll think about using, for example, especially if it has needed like a lot of mitochondrial support, would be something like Methylene Blue,
Mm.
which is a great compound. It's been around for a long time and helps support mitochondrial function. And so if you need some additional support, it's a great way to do that. If you need some stress mitigation, it's really important to break that spiral of doom that I was talking about before.
Yeah.
And that really actually makes the most sense to address the GABA system. The GABA is our main neurotransmitter in our brain that kind of calms down firing.
Very cool. Okay, and I definitely want to talk about methylene blue here in a quick second, but something kind of popped up into my mind here. Do you ever get the sense when you're dealing with a client and you're recommending like multiple protocols, like is there ever a sense where they're just a little bit overwhelmed by all the things that they feel like they need to do? Or do you sometimes will just condense it and say, this one thing right here is just do this, and this is going to get you the biggest bang for the buck. And maybe that is methylene blue. I was just curious if you ever run into that, and then you just say, hey, just do this.
Well, my high performance athletes will do almost anything you tell them to do, right? Because they're
Sure,
very good
sure.
at following protocols typically.
Yeah,
And so you tell them to change 10 different things, they'll change 10 different things. But those are the exceptions to the rule. Most
sure.
people have a hard time, changing their stuff, And so what I often do is I try to give them the long-term view as much as I can. And then we do it in a stepwise fashion, depending on what's the most important thing to address at that moment. So if it's the gut, we address the gut first. If it's hormones, we address the hormones first, whatever it might be. Usually it's the gut for me. Usually when I'm working with people, the first thing that I address if I can't address everything at the same time because it's just too much, will be their GI system and optimizing that. Because if you can get better digestion, better optimized commensal bacteria, less inflammation in the gut, and they don't have a leaky gut anymore, you're going to feel a whole lot better. But I give people breadcrumbs along the way, Max. That's the key. Like,
Sure.
you can't just say you're going to feel better in 3 months or 6 months or a year, because nobody's going to stick around with you. If I tell you they're going to have bloating and diarrhea every 5 days for the next 2 weeks, that's kind of doable. If I say it might be 3 months or 6 months until you feel better, that's a little
Yeah.
bit longer, right? So, like,
Yeah.
what can I do? I can give them, make sure they're having bowel movements every day if I think they're going to go through detox. Make sure they have an infrared sauna, or they get someplace hot. They live in Austin, just get the hell outside for a couple hours, during the week or something. And then I also think about, various, interventions from a supplementation perspective to help them now while they're on that longer path. And I think that's the key, is like, I try to give people the longer view, like, look, this is going to take some time, but this is how we're going to get you there. And
Yeah.
then I also will stagger protocols, as much as I feel like it's necessary to kind of roll out things rather than all at once.
Mm,
I also have to have a very kind of frank conversation with people to understand how much stress and lifestyle shifts they're going to be able to make, because I have to be very clear with people. If they're like in that sympathetic spiral of doom, it doesn't matter how many supplements I give you, doesn't matter how much we change your, fill in the blank, nothing's going to change. I promise you, not very much at least. And so there has to be a way to address those kinds of things, and they have to
sure.
be ready to do it. Like, I've had people that I've spoken to on the phone, like with consults, I can tell right away that they are so sympathetically dominant that there's nothing that's going to change physiologically until that stress comes down, right? And so you can't just get rid of the stress and everything's going to be better. That doesn't work either, because like, there's been a big movement over the last several years of just dealing with your trauma. I don't mean that in a quip sort of way, like just dealing with the trauma. Like, no, that's a big deal to deal with trauma, whether it be, sexual abuse when you were a child, or, marital abuse, or even like
Sure.
a traumatic hospitalization or whatever. Like, these things can be traumatic and people need to work through them. But the problem is, just working through that side of it is not enough, because you already have that spiral ongoing, that mitochondria that are not working very well. And, those mitochondria are important, man. Like, you have tons of mitochondria in the body. Like, in 7th grade, we learned that you had a mitochondria in your cell, but like, in some places we have thousands of mitochondria per cell in your sperm, eggs, brain, thousands of mitochondria per cell, as opposed to in your heart and your liver. You have other cells that don't have as many, but like, those are your energy engines. And if they're not working very well, like, you're not going to feel well. And so no matter how much stress you mitigate, if the mitochondria are still under significant amounts of stress, or the word would be deficient in various types of things that require it to make energy effectively or detox, you're not going to feel good no matter how much stress you mitigate. So in the end, the long answer to your question was that the short answer is, you have to meet people where they are and give them breadcrumbs along the way to get them where where they want to go.
Yeah, yeah. What kind of popped into my mind too, it's like kind of solving a math equation, right? There's an order of operations. That order of operations might be a mile long, but it's like you got to attack one thing, knock it down, and then kind of move through. And again, everyone's order of operations is going to be slightly different based off what they're trying to achieve. But that's what kind of makes sense to me, is like building it out and then attacking one thing at a time, and that's how people are probably going to become the most successful. But I was curious in regards to all these different protocols, right? Like hyperbaric, oxygen therapy, peptides, methylene blue. You know, if you could recommend one for a client, and I know you probably that might be hard for you to do based
No.
off like the circumstance, but it would there be one thing, like, okay, like if I had to pick one, this is the one thing that I would recommend most people maybe either supplement with or implement into their protocol to get the biggest bang for the buck in regards to mitochondrial health, human optimization, longevity, all those types of things?
The one thing, man, you want me to tell you one thing? Well, shit.
If you had to pick one.
I mean, if I had to pick one, it would either be something that was it would be focused on that sympathetic spiral of doom, either breaking sympathetic fight or flight or supporting mitochondrial function. But I often choose the mitochondrial function first, because again, if you break the fight or flight and you still have mitochondrial dysfunction, you're still going to feel terrible. And so, it's one of those things where if I had to choose between those two, I would pick the stress side of things almost hands down, right? If you just
Got
because
it.
like if you can break stress, everything else is going to get easier. It's not going to like, be sunshine and rainbows. But it's going to be easier if you can break that stressful spiral. So like, for example, I know sometimes it's 5 seconds, sometimes it's 3 minutes, but I know within that time frame, after talking to somebody on the phone or on a Zoom call for a consult, whether the tools and technologies and practices and things that I do is going to be able to help them or not.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not to say that I'm always the right judge of this. I've just been doing it long enough to know that if I can just kind of tell that no matter what I do, nothing's going to change unless they they just address what, this sympathetic spiral is ongoing for, what the reason is, if there is a reason, kind of thing. And so it's one of those things. Like, I remember a story recently. I was talking to a lady. I think she'd consulted with me about hyperbaric therapy. She wanted to know about methylene blue. And she was just telling me about all these things that she tried, all these doctors that she tried, and that she wasn't sleeping, and like her kids were sick. And then she did this. I'm like, well, I think we got to take a step back here, right? So if I don't think methylene blue or hyperbaric therapy is going to be helpful here. I think that you really think about, like, what are these sort of patterns that you've created, and how can you address them so that you're not having this sympathetic spiral where you're just continually stressing the system and don't have any downtime. Because the thing is, like, in
Yeah, like it sounds like to
sympathetic,
me like her living situation or her home situation might just be an absolute shit show, causing all of this stress, anxiety, whatever the case is.
right?
And
And you don't know. So the thing is that the chicken
yeah,
and the egg is difficult to know sometimes, right? Because you can
sure.
have, like, a good example is COVID, for example. So if you got severe COVID and then you get severe mitochondrial dysfunction because of that, which has happened, and I have a number of patients that I work with over the years like this, you may not have had any kind of stress at all related, like sort of sympathetic activation because of an issue related to COVID itself. It was just you had the mitochondrial dysfunction that happened because of the infection, and then the mitochondria get dysfunctional, and the system gets in this sort of reactive state, like, shit, you're not making enough energy, so we need to, like, put you in stress mode so you can make more energy. Right. And then as a result of that, you get the sympathetic activation because of the mitochondrial dysfunction. So that's why it's really important to kind of really suss that out. And then if you can find out if you can figure out the chicken before the egg, which again, sometimes hard to do, sometimes it's pretty obvious, then you can kind of, either focus on the chicken or the egg. But most of the time I focus on both at the same time. So, I mean, it could be, the one intervention could be like divorcing your spouse or or
Hmm.
sleeping in a new bedroom than your spouse if there's no way. Or it could be, all the interventions are going to be different, but they're going to be sort of related to those two categories, either stress breaking that spiral or the mitochondrial support aspect. And then, then I have products that I use, of course, to help with this stuff, to get people feeling better very fast so they can feel what it feels like to not feel stress, or to feel what it feels like to actually have mitochondrial support. And by doing that, you give them a window into opening up, like, oh, wait, things could be actually different than I actually feel. And then that's when you have more of a window to do some of the harder work sometimes.
Yeah, very cool. And that makes sense. I wanted to pivot real quick to methylene blue.
Yeah,
So, looking into it a little bit, I understand it was like a textile dye or a fabric dye, and people online are calling it a limitless pill. I'm curious to get just like maybe a brief background on methylene blue, and then we can kind of dive into like how we can use it for optimization or whatever the case is.
sure, sure. So Blue Man Group, everybody sees the Blue Man Group. I'm just kidding.
Sure.
So, no, we're not painting everybody with blue these days. But the idea was, back in the 1870s, they were creating these textiles to make various colors, and they found this one that they developed called methylene blue that dyed things shockingly blue. And so in the 1870s, it was the preferred pigment to dye blue jeans blue, for example. But they were also looking for drugs or compounds, really, because they didn't really have drugs at the time, compounds that would actually help with infection, because there was very few available. There weren't any real prescribed antimicrobials until after World War II, until the late 1940s and 50s. And so before that, they were doing all these studies on various compounds, and they were studying the type of dye, thiazine dyes, that methylene blue belongs to. And they figured out that methylene blue had this amazing capacity to kill pathogens. Not only to kill pathogens, but to actually not harm the human host after killing pathogens, even at high
Interesting.
doses, which was a very novel thing. They did find certain things out there in the world that would kill pathogens, but also kill the host, but that's not very helpful, as we all know. And so this was an exception. That's why it got actually the name, the magic bullet at the time, because it had this capacity. So between 1897, when it was the first drug registered with the FDA for malaria, actually at the time, until 1950s, it was one of the primary antimicrobials around. Even during World War II, it was something that was used like in the battlefields. If people were in the Pacific, they had to use it prophylactically at higher doses. about a milligram per kilogram or higher. It's a fantastic antimicrobial, is what it comes down to. Has no real resistance patterns compared to other antimicrobials that have come around since that time. It does have a couple side effects that make it less exciting for people to use, including blue urine. Blue urine, if you take methylene blue, your urine will turn blue. And
No
that is just
way.
something you should need to know. Yeah. And so just because the methylene blue concentrates in the urine, and so you're going to urinate blue. If you take very high doses of methylene blue, actually some of your other secretions like your poop and your tears and things like that, but that's only like a lot of methylene blue, over about 3 milligrams per kilogram.
That's wild.
Subsequently, that's actually the doses that might turn your brain blue. And that was a whole thing about blue brains that came out maybe about 5 or 6 months ago now, where there was people saying, if you take methylene blue, you're going to get a blue brain. And it's going to stay there. And the answer is no, that's not going to happen, especially at low doses. At very high doses, given IV, that may happen, but the high doses IV are only given at very, very shocking times like CPR, cardiopulmonary arrest, septic shock, vasogenic shock, these kinds of things. And so, but lower doses of methylene blue are very safe. And the reason why all this is sort of kind of evolved into that is that because methylene blue's got a couple different, chapters after the one of being an antimicrobial. The next was as the first, it was actually the drug that the first antipsychotics were derived from. It has capacity to increase a couple of neurotransmitters, ones like norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin, for example. Those are all increased with methylene blue because it works as something called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. It also became a laboratory stain, and so that's how I learned about it in chemistry class when I was in college. But interestingly, so what does it stain? What is it we use it for in the cell? We actually see it concentrate in the mitochondria. So over the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of interest in methylene blue in how it can support mitochondrial function. And that's really where my interest and the interest of my company really came in like 2018 timeframe, knowing that there were some studies showing that methylene blue had the capacity to increase memory, verbal processing, cognition in healthy adults. And also there was some preclinical stuff in animals showing significant benefit in things like Alzheimer's, concussion, traumatic brain injury, potentially in MS, Parkinson's disease, and a couple other things as well at lower doses of methylene blue, like 5, 10, 15 milligrams of methylene blue, 16 milligrams of methylene blue, not super high doses. And so we decided to make a company that developed a number of products that help people right now, as I was alluding to earlier. And the first product that our company made was one that contained methylene blue. This is in 2020 we launched, and we were the first company to develop and release a commercialized methylene blue product at that time. Now, fast forward 5 years later, there's about 60 different companies making things with methylene blue in them. So it's gotten a little bit crazy, and that's okay. It's been got a lot of popular people talking about it the last year or so, and it's obviously been good for business on our end. But it's a bit difficult to navigate as a consumer. Because there's a lot of different methylene blue out there. You have to be super careful of contamination. It can get contaminated with heavy metals like lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic, which you don't want. A lot of the liquids out there are also very low in potency compared to what they say on the label. So it might say, it's like it's 1 milligram per drop or something like that, but it ends up being like 0.4 milligrams per drop. Like it's super low concentration oftentimes when we've tested them. So so the short story with how we use methylene blue now is as a mitochondrial support. It helps with energy production. It helps with detoxification. It can compensate for any element of mitochondrial dysfunction when you're coming to the process of making energy. It can help with any element of helping the detoxification side. So what I tell my patients all the time, it's energy and detox, or energy and resilience. That's what methylene blue can do.
Very cool. Let's go deeper then. So they're in the form of like lozenges or like troches, correct?
Yes,
And
that's how we make
then,
them in Troscriptions. Yep.
yep. Okay, perfect. And then I'm assuming there might be different strengths in regards to the lozenge that you're ingesting or sucking on or whatever. Let's say I pop the lozenge. What would be like the top 3 things I would notice right out of the gate?
It really depends on the person, right? Because I think a lot of people are using methylene blue for different reasons. If you're using it for endurance or performance, or if you're on your health optimization journey and you're starting really slow and don't have a lot of energy and have a lot of detox issues, you might see some benefit on that side too. So a lot of it depends on kind of where you're starting. And often it really depends on the dosing as well. But in general, what most people will feel is an elevation, a better mood, a little more energy, a little more capacity. depending on the dose, it might be a lot more capacity, a lot more energy. But it's not typically feeling like you're on Adderall, for example. Like
Got it.
Adderall is a stimulant. Methylene blue itself is not technically a stimulant. It does have some properties that can make you think it might have similar effects, but not the same degree, not the same degree as taking an Adderall, for example. There are rare people that take methylene blue and feel that way, but for the most part, it's not typically that feel. So usually you'll feel that you have more staying power, you have more brain power, you have more
Mm.
endurance for a longer period of time.
And
And
these are effects I would notice within minutes or
well, within
hours?
about, depending on how you take it, if you take it as a buccal troche, like which is how we develop them at Troscriptions. So troches are these dissolvable lozenges that go between your upper cheek and gum. What's nice about a troche is that, and this is what all of our products are developed like at Troscriptions, is that we have the dissolving here between your upper cheek and gum because it's faster. So you have faster acting, usually within about 15 to 30 minutes, as opposed to if you swallow something, it can take 45 minutes, an hour, or longer, depending on the situation, especially if you're not fasted. The nice thing also about a buccal troche is that you can have more powerful ingredients because when you swallow something, it goes through digestion in your stomach, your liver, et cetera. It's called first pass metabolism. You have a degradation of those ingredients oftentimes. Methylene was actually an exception, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's nice to have as a buccal troche for the most part for many ingredients because they don't get degraded in the liver. The third thing that's nice about them is they're titratable. So you can start off, the troches are developed as these square lozenges and they have like a line in the middle of it across, so you can cut it up into a quarter, half, or full depending on what you need, and then you can kind of dial in your dose. Okay, and so it takes about, as a troche, about 15 to 30 minutes to start working. But the thing about methylene blue, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's shockingly blue, this particular compound. And so if you dissolve in the mouth, your mouth is going to turn blue, and not everybody wants a blue mouth. I totally get that. So if you're going to have it and not dissolve in the mouth, the second best is to swallow it on an empty stomach. If you swallow on an empty stomach, it'll be faster than if you have it with food, for sure. Not as fast as dissolving in the mouth, but your mouth won't be blue in the process, which
Got it.
not everybody wants a blue mouth. But if you do have more cognitive issues, more mental health issues, sometimes dissolving in the mouth is actually better because it's going to work faster that way. But
Got
the key is everybody's a little bit different. So like, for example, if I'm working with my endurance athletes, what they'll tend to notice when they take methylene blue is that they can keep their heart rate up for longer without having to slow down. And the reason for that is that methylene blue can act just like oxygen in the mitochondria, in those cells, in the energy parts of our cells, energy producing parts of our cells. And so it can simulate there being more oxygen around for longer than there actually is. And so you can see the potential additional benefits of this. If you're going on an airplane, for example, if you fly long distances or go on any airplane, really, you're being pressurized to between 6,000 and 8,000 feet above sea level. Every cabin is pressurized. And if you live at sea level, you're at 21% oxygen. But if you get on an airplane and you're pressurized to 8,000 feet, you're about 16% oxygen. So that's a lot less oxygen that you're getting in all of a sudden. And so the body gets into this sort of stress mode immediately. It also gets tired as well.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why as soon as the cabin door closes on an airplane, you start feeling tired, is because you're suddenly at 8,000 feet, from zero, and so that's a big deal. So methylene blue can compensate for that by coming into the mitochondria to really start helping you make more energy more effectively, and compensate for that low oxygen state. And so if you're an endurance racer, you're going to feel that. If you're on an airplane, you're going to feel that. If you are on a mountain, you're going to feel that. So if you're mountaineering and you're going up high peaks, you have to stop because you don't have enough oxygen capacity. The oxygen levels are lower when you're in altitude. And so you can't go as fast for as long as you want. And methylene blue can help with that. And so we're actually doing some trials now and working with a couple people to try to get a sense of that better. But we have one cyclist that is not telling anybody that he's using it. He doesn't want anybody to know because he doesn't want anybody to know why he's doing better with all his times. And it's legal. It's not something that's, it's WADA approved. It's not something that's going to be illegal if you get caught with it in your urine. The only thing is that, if you're taking pee tests and your urine's blue, it's going to be surprising to the people that you're working or the people that are checking your urine, kind of thing. And it can also potentially mess up some of the other analytes I've heard before as well, and they're looking for other things. But itself is not an issue when it comes to drug testing for WADA improvement status and things like that. So for my athletes, that's often endurance. It's also and then there's also the other piece where we think that there's actually some pretty good studies on methylene blue in animals, in dogs, of increasing lactate threshold. So time to lactate threshold, your time to lactate buildup is longer. So you can do more work, do more exercise. And that's kind of dealing with what I talked about, which is that aerobic capacity going up, as I just mentioned, which is why this is the case. And then there's also some indication that maybe you can actually recover at a higher heart rate with methylene blue around, because again,
Really?
that the capacity of it to work on energy production, detoxification, and so that you'll find that you don't have to be at a low of a heart rate to feel like you're actually recovered when you have methylene blue around. And that's at least anecdotally. So I also have a friend of mine, big guy in the CrossFit community for many years. His name is Brian McKenzie, who you've probably heard of. Brian's also been playing around with a lot of hypoxic training along with methylene blue, and seeing that if you do hypoxic training ahead of time and then you do aerobic work afterwards, you have significant benefits as well, and increasing VO2 max and things like that when he does it. So there's a lot of different ways. And then on the other side of the spectrum, if you're dealing more of like with a chronic issue, I mean, it could be almost anything, but like the way that you'll start feeling better, a little bit more energy, a little more detox. Like you feel like you're actually, your brain's better on, like your brain fog is better. Maybe your anxiety gets better. Your mental health problems get better, like to some degree, just because your mitochondria get more energy. Right. And so I like to think of methylene blue at low doses, like 4, 8, 12, 16, kind of being like an adaptogen for these kinds of people, where if they need more energy, that's where it's going to start. If they need more detox, that's where it's going to start. And then it's going to start helping the system rebuild itself and rejuvenate as a result of supporting the system and where it's required.
Man, that's so cool. And it kind of makes me think back to when we had the gym out in Las Vegas, when we were like sending teams to regionals and stuff like that. So we were in like the Mountain West region, but guys would have to go up to like Utah or higher elevations to ultimately compete. But that would destroy people. And we would see a lot of the times the people that were in Southern California that would come up and work out, even just being in Las Vegas. It's not like a crazy elevation from sea level, but
Yeah.
it's enough to where you would notice it. So if you have people from Southern California or sea level coming up and to train in Vegas, they would be getting crushed by certain workouts. And then if you're going up to like Denver, Colorado to work out, then you're getting really crushed. So it's like, man, I wish something like this was around years ago to be able to compete at these higher
Right.
elevations. Like that would be a very useful
That's
tool.
why people that live where I live are at a significant advantage. And that's why
Yeah.
a lot of the marathon, high performance communities, they live in these areas.
Yep.
What's funny enough is that they don't take care of themselves. Like they just run until they can't run anymore, because they're not actually minding their mitochondria at all and minding their oxidative stress levels, which get
Yeah.
gigantic. And this is why you see people with like, calcified, arteries and have to get triple bypasses that are 50 that have been doing ultra marathons for 20 years, right? Because it's a lot of stress on the body. And so
Mm.
that's why supporting mitochondrial function is so important. And also, not just on the energy side, but the detox side too. And again, it's a lot of stress on the system, just as a kind of a side note for people. But yeah, I mean, that's in essence where, I mean, I've just seen amazing stories over the years with methylene blue, right? And that's why I've gotten a lot of healthy respect for it. It's not the one thing, like you were asking me before, and I was hedging
Sure.
on this, as like the one
Yeah.
thing that anybody could do, because it's like, it's so variable depending on the person. But it is something that I almost always will recommend in people to start off at low doses as they're building up their system, if they have a long way to go, or if they're trying to tweak and optimize their system on the other edge of performance. Because, on both edges, like, the performance edge is a knife's edge too. And people on that side are often very close to burning in some way, because especially if they're, an older athlete, if they're over 25 or 30 years of age, like then they start breaking down. This is when they start getting injuries and like, oh, I just
Yeah.
got injured. Like, no, it's like you're causing so much oxidative stress and in your body for such a long time that, eventually things just sort of crashed, right? But like it didn't happen overnight. This has been going on for a while and the system just couldn't tolerate it anymore. So I think the key for people that are listening is that understand that's very important. That methylene blue is a fantastic mitochondrial support. So it help with energy, it help with detox, it help you go further and go higher and for longer, because it can work just like oxygen as well. And that mitochondrial dysfunction is not just for people, on the sort of the complex medical illness side, which it is, like your long COVIDs, chronic autoimmune problems, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, of course, but also on the endurance side, you guys are always on the knife's edge of just, getting injured, probably because you're not recovering well enough. You're not
Yeah.
downregulating that nervous system, because that downregulation, that other nervous system is called your parasympathetic nervous system. And that's when we rest, digest, detox, and actually build muscle and gain muscle. So you don't gain muscle being sympathetic all the time. So if you're out there running and racing and you're not feeling like you're making any gains, probably because you're doing too much, not too little oftentimes. Right. And
Yeah.
so we know that ramping down exercise can be dramatically helpful for a lot of people in these kinds of situations. So just some things to think about.
No, no, that's great advice there, and that obviously makes a lot of sense. One thing I wanted to touch on with you, because I'm seeing a lot of comments online just about hyperbaric oxygen therapy, methylene blue, and some of these different biohacking type of interventions, and people saying, "Oh, you know what? Like this is for people." And going back to like the Brian Johnson thing, these interventions and protocols, they're just for people that have money, or they're just for people that can afford them. What would you say to critics that are that say, "Hey, these types of protocols or interventions are only meant for people with certain financial means?"
I mean, the first thing is that the best things in life are free, man, right? Go outside, go ground yourself, get drink. I mean, hydration doesn't cost that much money.
Sure.
Eating, doesn't have to cost that much if you do it right. You don't have to go and get the most artisan stuff ever to do it. So I think the basics like sleep, stress, like these are all things that don't cost a lot of money typically and that are very important as basics, right? And I mentioned this earlier where you want to give people a roadmap to where they want to go, but it does require, some breadcrumbs along the way to help them understand that, if they want to feel better, they have to stop eating pizza twice a week or whatever it might be. And they have to be
Mm,
willing to do those kinds of things. But, it's about where they are and like how you're going to get them there sometimes. Right. And so I think that the low hanging fruit is the stuff that's for free or close to it. And then like above that, like, well, how are you going to kind of, help with those breadcrumbs along the way? And things like methylene blue are not that expensive to try as something as to support a very unnatural world that we live in, a very synthetic world that we live in, right? We don't live in the Jetsons yet, but I mean, that's the idea. We don't live in a natural ancestral world anymore. So we need sometimes things that are not from the natural world, like methylene blue is a synthetic ingredient to actually help us and help our mitochondria work better. And so I think when it comes down to it for me, when I'm working with people, it's let's get the basics together,
mm,
but knowing that the basics are not easy. Okay. And so then what's the lowest hanging fruit that we can use on top of the basic things that we all need to be doing to help get people to do the basics better, and then that could be from getting a meditation device or, starting to do a breathwork practice or starting to do 10 push-ups a day or one push-up a day. I don't give a shit. Sometimes it just means just one push-up. That's fine. Like
yeah.
whatever that sort of habit that's going to be, that's going to start changing everything else that you do. Right. And so, we've exercise is something called the Cornerstone habit, right? You start exercising, typically everything else gets easier. You want to eat better, you want to sleep better, you want to have better relationships, your moods are better, right? And so that's great, but not everybody can go exercise right away. So what's the Cornerstone habit for each individual? It's going to be different, right? But what I found to be the biggest lever there,
Hmm.
the biggest two levers are energy and stressing less. Okay. So if you can make them feel a little more energy, even if they're overstressed and everything else, but they have a little more energy, like, okay, then they start feeling a little bit better. Then you can start doing other stuff. Or if you can just downregulate a stress response a little bit with some support and some guidance. And that's really important because if people have been stressed for long periods of time, they don't even know what it feels like to have a downregulated stress response. And then that's going to be a setup for having reactive anxiety when you actually decrease their stress. And I've seen this, like we have some things at our company, something called Trocom, for example, at Troscriptions, that's great at
Yeah.
downregulating the nervous system. But I've seen it in front of me, somebody have an anxiety attack once their stress level went down so low, they didn't know what it felt like to be that way anymore. So they had reactive anxiety related to that.
No
And so,
way.
yeah, oh yeah, totally. It happens all the time because people don't know what it feels like to be downregulated like that, right? And so my, I guess, as I kind of talk about this, it's sort of give people the experience of what it feels like to feel like they did before, in quotes, right? Like, this is how you used to feel when you had more energy. This is how you used to feel when you had less stress. Okay, that's how it feels. Let's go back there. Like, that's how we can get there over the long term by optimizing your diet, your labs, your relationships, your stress, all that kind of thing, right? And so finding a way in, my ways in are the mitochondria and then the stress system, that breaking that sympathetic spiral of doom. Because if I do them at the same time in a sort of a symphony of, I conduct the symphony in a way that they can feel both at the same time. That's really where I found the best outcomes in patients, where they can really see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, or that there's just a light in general. Like there's something that's not just darkness, or like I can't break this kind of deal.
Yeah.
Or if you're like an athlete, it's like I can't do anymore. Like I'm done. Like this is as much as I can do. I'm starting to break down, or like I just can't increase my times or decrease my times or whatever it might be. Like I'm stuck. Like the stuck part of it is like there are ways around that or through it, but it's not usually by doing more. Typically, it's typically by doing less and then maybe doing something differently. And that's like,
Mm.
you know, these are like nuanced conversations that you can't have on a podcast without talking to somebody specifically about what they're going through, because everybody's going to be a little bit different. And if you've been a clinician as long as I have, you know that there's no cookie cutter way of doing these things. There's frameworks, right? And I have a framework, but I break that framework all the time, and I do different things if I need to, if I think it's not going to work. But the goal with the framework is that it works more of the time than it doesn't. And I think my frameworks do that. But again, everybody's going to be a different place, and nobody falls into like very few people fall to like on a page of a book with this particular presentation.
Yeah.
It's not real life, man.
Yeah, totally agree. I get that. I wanted to go into some of the products that you have because one of them caught my eye, mainly because it seemed like to me it had like a lot of different elements to it. And and I don't want to butcher the name here. It was blue Canateen.
Canateen. Yep, blue Canateen. You got
Okay.
it. Yeah.
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 So it's got the methylene blue in it. It's got nicotine. Looks like it's got CBD and caffeine.
Yep.
So if I were to pop that, how would I expect to feel?
Like you want a prescription stimulant, but better.
Really?
Because it doesn't give you the jitteriness, the come down, the crash, the anorexia after you finish it. Doesn't mess up your sleep. It only lasts for about 3 to 5 hours. It was developed with very low doses of methylene blue, nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. So it's all low dose and synergistic. So it's not like one of them's overpowering you compared to the others. It's all working at lower doses and nothing's addicting in there. The nicotine dose is super low. It's just 1 milligram in each troche, and then the average dose of each of actually most of our troches, but blue Canateen as well, is a half of a troche. So you take a half of that. And then that one's better to dissolve in the mouth if you can, in the upper cheek and gum as a buccal troche, because it's going to work fast. Nicotine is very fast acting. Within about 5 to 10 minutes, 15 minutes for most people, your brain's going to turn back on. Like you're going to have better memory, better focus, better verbal fluidity, better recall, all the things that I should have done before this podcast, but I didn't. But, in general, I think I'm doing okay, but I should have. I typically do. I like to have some sort of combination like that.
What do you typically take before podcasts?
I mean, when I first started doing a lot of podcasts, like I did more stimulants, but I actually feel over the years that my brain's already working at about 1,000 miles an hour at baseline, as you probably can tell. And so like for me, it's actually calming down the nervous system that actually helps me perform better. And so everybody kind of has this experience where they are about to give a speech or they're getting really nervous or something. They forget all their lines. They forget what they were going to say, et cetera, et cetera. This is because the frontal part of your brain actually gets less blood flow if you're stressed. Your fight or flight nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system, that's the one that kind of builds your blood flow into your limbic system. So you're like the back of your brain. So like your fear centers, your coordination centers, so you can run, get the hell out of the way from a lion, or you can move out of the way from a raging river or whatever it might be. Like that part of the brain's on, but your front of your brain's not on. That's why, like, if this has happened to me, I remember like recently, a couple of years ago now, like my son was playing at a park and he hit his head, and I ran over to him, I checked him out, did all this thing, and then 5 minutes later, I kind of like woke up in quotes, right? Because I had it was all done, like just complete muscle memory. Like there was no sort of thinking involved, right? Because it was like I was scared for him, right? And so that's the kind of idea where your sort of your front of your brain kind of shuts off. And so the nice thing about something like Trocom that we have at Troscriptions is a little bit different. It has CBD and CBG, which is another non-psychoactive cannabinoid, and kava and something called B3 GABA. It's a nice kind of GABA that gets into the brain. GABA itself as a supplement is too big to get across. If you take GABA and it works for you, it's probably a bad thing. It probably means that you're leaking things into the brain that shouldn't get in there, which is called like a leaky blood-brain barrier. But the Trocom is great because it downregulates the nervous system just a little bit or a lot if you need it, depending on the dose. And then you can feel your brain kind of coming back online. So a nice combination actually is the blue Canateen and the Trocom together, because the blue Canateen gives you that focus, that productivity, and then the sympathetic activation. But then you also have the Trocom, which gives you like a little bit of that calm focus at the same time. And so it's a nice combination if you can get the dosing right. For me, I typically am more on the calm side, or I will take like our Just Blue, which is our pure methylene blue troche, and that's a 16 milligrams of methylene blue. It's great for everything we've been describing here. We have a higher dose one for practitioners at 50 milligrams, which is more for infection, more for acute trauma, acute inflammation. But for day-to-day operations, mitochondrial support, the methylene blue, the just blue dosing is great. I have a good story about that. I have but there's a kind of like an in between story from a dosing perspective.
Sure.
I work with a guy that did the Leadville race here in Colorado, which is a ultra marathon here in Colorado. It's the highest in the world. I think it's like 12 and
Yep.
13,000 foot peaks.
Yeah, I'm
And so he
familiar
wanted
with
to
it.
get,
Yeah.
and most people are that are in the performance space. And he wanted to cut some time off from the previous year. He had done whatever time he had done. And then we talked and we ended up working with him and doing 32 milligrams of methylene blue every 4 hours. And we did the blue Canateen every 4 hours, a full troche. And so that was a full dose of everything and of all the ingredients in the blue Canateen. And he cut off 3 hours from his time from the
No
year
way.
before. So 3 hours is not small. And so the reason for this is that, again, we were talking about endurance earlier. Methylene blue is going to give you an endurance boost. It's going to give you that endurance boost because because it can act just like oxygen in your cells and help you continue to make energy more effectively for longer without having to slow down. So that's kind of like an in-between dose for somebody that's more on the high performance side of things. And so I'll often have people dose and redose methylene blue every 4 to 6 hours for longer competitions because that's the half-life. That's how long it's going to last at its kind of high peak concentration. So, yeah.
Very cool. That's good to know. And I know we're coming up here on time, Dr. Scott, and I want to be mindful of what you got going on for the rest of your day. I had some rapid fire questions. I don't necessarily need rapid fire answers. I just like to do these sometimes with
Sure.
guests.
Sure.
But
I
yeah,
enjoy them.
so yeah, and going back because I know we were talking about hyperbaric oxygen therapy at the very, very beginning, I feel like. In regards to that protocol, like what's the most surprising effect that someone would feel like right away just after implementing that?
Well, the thing about hyperbaric therapy is that it's not usually a like immediate reward kind of technology.
It's
It's
like you have
typically
to do
something
it
that builds
multiple
up over
times.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah. If it's more of an acute issue, you might see a dramatic change almost automatically or immediately. Like you might see swelling or bruising go down very quickly if you have an acute injury. You also can see, yeah, sort of more of the acute pathology get better faster. So if somebody has an acute injury to their knee, you're going to see their swelling get better. You're going to see their bruising get better. You're going to see the range of motion get better. All these things can happen within a couple sessions. And even from a recovery perspective, you can use it like after a big day of a workout. You may not feel a whole lot different in the chamber, but I promise you, if you check things like, you have an Oura ring or you have a Whoop or something like that, your recovery scores are going to be much better than you anticipated, as long as you don't go to like a too deep of a pressure in the chamber after you do like a long workout, heavy workout. So there's nuances with that, like as far as which pressure is best for what. There's soft chambers that go to milder pressures, harder chambers that go to deeper pressures. But in essence, you have to be mindful of the kinds of pressure you're using to make sure you're going to get benefit from a recovery perspective rather than causing more stress in the system.
makes sense. What's the biggest myth about longevity medicine you wish people would stop believing?
Well, there's a Greek myth that goes along something like this, where if you have a genie and you can ask for 3 wishes, the first one you ask for is eternal life. The second one or third one, better be asking for eternal youth at the same time. So you don't want to just live longer, but you want to live healthier as well.
Sure.
So I think that longevity is a little bit more appropriate to say as health span, right? Because most people want to live a long time and then die as healthy as possible kind of deal. And so that's kind of I think the thing about longevity medicine that I like to reframe. It's not about living as long as you can. It's about living as healthy as you can for as long as you can. And most of us would choose to live as healthy as we can rather than as long as we can if we had to choose, right? So living 20, 30 years of having morbidities, we know that, women especially have significant amounts of morbidity when it comes down to how they live longer than men, but they have a lot more years of chronic issues compared to men because men don't live as long. But so I think the biggest thing is to change the conversation from longevity to health span. And that's actually what we do at Health Optimization Medicine. Actually, we actually change and shift the perspective from disease to health, and also shift the perspective from longevity to health span, to looking at things from optimizing levels of vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors when you were 21 to 30 years of age. That's when we're the most optimized to do all the things, be most resilient, to fight, to flee, to fornicate, and everything else, and get up the next day and do it all over again without complaining, without having less energy, because again, that's when we're the most optimized. So why shouldn't we have optimized levels of vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and cofactors, hormones, and neurotransmitters to when we're those of ages? And so that's the idea with Health Optimization Medicine: shift the perspective and conversation from longevity to health span.
Well said. Yeah, and it's funny, I was just thinking, would I rather live to 120 and be decrepit or die at 90 with like most of my motor skills and my ability to walk and function? I'd take dying at 90 all day.
Most people would.
Yeah, rather than
Yeah.
just living for another 20 or 30 years or anything like that. Okay, last question. So I know you were talking about the Leadville runner that was supplementing with methylene blue, taking, a few hours off of his time for the previous year. What's the most jaw-dropping transformation that you've seen with a client?
Jaw dropping. I mean, a couple come to mind in different. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, man. So there's like, it's
Sure,
hard to just pick a couple. The ones that come to mind here. So for methylene blue, I'll give you a couple stories. One
sure.
was a lady that got some methylene blue early on, maybe in 2020, 2021, or just blue for her grandmother. Her grandmother had mild cognitive impairment, lived in the US, was from Mexico originally, and gave her some methylene blue. And she started telling stories about her childhood that nobody had ever heard of before. The methylene blue just started just waking up her memory. Her memories just started coming out and flooding. And so everybody started surrounding her. She was telling stories, and she maintained taking methylene blue for a long period of time after that. And the grandmother was doing so much better, and the granddaughter was very happy for that. Another story, a lady she's a physical therapist for many years, but had long COVID. No, excuse me, physical therapist for very many years, and had mold exposure. And because the mold was out of work, had the mold remediated in her house, in her body, but she still felt terrible. This is pure mitochondrial dysfunction. She started taking like 4 or 8 milligrams of methylene blue, and within 2 weeks, she was back to work. She felt so great. And these are
Wow.
really relatively early on, that I remember them so well because it was kind of shocking to me how well they worked in some ways. I mean, of course, when you do theoretical modeling and we did clinical testing with everything, we had some good benefits. People seeing more energy, less brain fog. I had one guy recently, within the last couple of months, he's like, Dr. Scott, I started taking your methylene blue and my anxiety went away. I was like, your anxiety went away? Really? He's like, yeah, I had all this anxiety all my life. And then I started taking methylene blue and it was gone. I was like, well, that's interesting, right? So like, what's the sort of the reason for that? I think there's multiple. I think there's a mitochondrial piece to that. I think there's a neurotransmitter piece to that. And so I've just been impressed really with this compound over the years in that capacity. I think I've had a number of them on the other side of things, on the GABAergic side. So
Hmm.
um, I talked about this kind of, in passing briefly when talking about giving people the experience of feeling like their stress is actually gone and they're in parasympathetic mode. And I had one patient that this was transformative to her to understand that she'd been in fight or flight for years and years and didn't know it until she felt like it was not to be in fight or flight for the first time in many years. Had
Yeah.
this reactive anxiety. We worked her through it. And then she knew what there was and she knew how to get back there. Well, she didn't know how to get back there, but she knew where what there was. You know what I mean? Like she
Yeah.
knew where, like that feeling. And so as a result, we worked with her for a long period of time and she was able to downregulate her nervous system and can become in much, much better balance, and feel much better from a day-to-day basis. On the hyperbaric side, I've had tons of cases over the years, people with concussions. One kid always stands out to me. He was a skier, 3 or 4 concussions, was never able to ski again, was never told he was never going to be able to ski again, wasn't doing well in school, wanted to kill himself. Got like 10 of I'm thinking maybe 10 hyperbaric sessions overall initially, and he was completely better. He's like, I feel great. Like no more mental health issues, no more headaches, no more dizziness. He had all those symptoms too.
That's awesome.
Still, I didn't want him going back to skiing, and I told him that, but symptomatically he was completely better. And so, like, those are some of the stories that stand out to me.
Very cool. Before we wrap up here, anything new coming up for you? Anything that you're working on?
Well, just, building my companies. I have the Troscriptions company that we make tons of products that are really helping people right now along that path. We have our Just Blue and Blue Canateen. Those are the ones with methylene blue in there. The methylene blue, nicotine, caffeine, and CBD is our Blue Canateen. We have our GABAergic stuff, and really trying to get more education out on that sympathetic spiral of doom that I mentioned a couple times, which is
Sure.
got to break the spiral if you want to feel better, if you want to heal, if you want to recover, if you want to be performing at your best. And if you're an endurance athlete, there's a very high likelihood that you're spending more time than you're supposed to in fight or flight mode and not getting enough recovery. It's just, in general, all of us like to work. We don't like to rest, but
Yeah.
resting is just important, if not more important, when it comes down to it. Also, new products are always coming out. We have things coming out for pain, for mood, for stress. Additionally, we have a whole practitioner line of products as well. So if you're a practitioner, you can get your own account on our practitioner portal, sign up and get webinars, interviews, lectures, physician guest references, those kinds of things, and discounts on products for your offices or for your online stores and things like that. So always building, always growing, and that's the deal, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Well, this was fantastic. Where can people find you online, get in contact with you, work with you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so easy place to find me. Everything is sort of one place is drscottsherr.com, DRSCOTTSHERR.com. So that's where most of my stuff is sort of housed. There's my hyperbaric consulting there. There's my health optimization medicine consulting there as well. There's also links to my company's Troscriptions, link to my company. I don't know if you can hear my dog. Is that you can hear him? Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay. So links to my company's Troscriptions, link to my company's health optimization medicine practice, the nonprofit organization. Also, link to my company that's involved in the hyperbaric space called One Base Health. So you can check it out all there. And then on Instagram, I'm at Dr. Scott Sherr, DRSCOTTSHERR. Troscriptions at Troscriptions, health optimization medicine at homehope.org. I think that's it. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out. Check out Troscriptions. Check out some of the work. Lots of education on our platforms. That's what I'm here to do. So
Yeah, very, and I very much appreciate you taking the time. I'll put everything in the show notes. Yeah, this was awesome. And thank you guys so much for listening to the Low Carb Consultant Podcast. We'll catch you guys on the next one.